Hey everyone, this is Clayton Smith, continuing on our office tour, my home office tour. So today, we've got Steve Smithers on the call. And if Steve Smithers is on the call, that means there's only one thing we can be talking about. Steve, what do you think we're talking about today?
Meraki, of course.
Meraki. And Steve, I don't know if you noticed, but I even wore the Meraki t-shirt. By the way, this is the only Meraki t-shirt I have. So Steve, I'll give you my
it's a little
address, okay?
hint, huh? Hint. Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah,
I got the hint. All right.
So
Meraki
Steve, I bet
t-shirt.
Yeah, exactly. Write that down. So Steve, I bet a lot of people don't know you. So real quickly, tell us what you do for Cisco.
Yep, and I've got my Meraki shirt on as well. The old school. This is going on 8 years old. I joined Meraki when we were still a little bitty startup company about 8 years ago. It's been a fun ride. I left a very large company to come over to Meraki, and I was a little nervous about the startup culture, and I got to tell you, it was the best move I ever made in my life. So 8 years running, going strong, and still loving it.
Awesome. Well, we're going to go through the Meraki dashboard just a little bit. But for people that aren't familiar with Meraki, while I kind of get the dashboard set up on this side, why don't you talk about just very briefly what makes Meraki unique? And also, I mean, in the tech industry, for you to have stayed with one place for that long means that they're doing something right. So maybe you can speak to that for just a second.
Yeah, I'd be glad to. So the unique thing with Meraki, and the companies, are trying to catch up to what Meraki's really perfected over the course of several years. But what they did was a brilliant combination of taking something that people took for granted as being super reliable, and they took that complexity that typically was used to build these complex networks, right? And they made it simple. And up to, several years ago anyway, when Meraki first introduced this very unique simplicity concept, everything was still very, very complex. You had command line interface, you had to, IP into certain switches here and there to make changes. And so they developed virtual stacking, they developed auto VPN, they developed, cloud networking in general. So they took this very complex, what used to be very complex architecture, and simplified it. And that's what the market wanted, and that's what the market still wants, and that's the reason for the major growth.
No, I completely agree with that. So in the first section of my home tour, we pointed out the physical Meraki stack that I actually have sitting behind me. But today we're actually going to go through kind of logical components of it and really talk about why I use Meraki here at the house. And I'll give you a kind of a teaser here. It's because it's easy. So anything that I can find, again, this gets back to my methodology from the prior videos. If it's easy and I can do it at home and I don't have to stand up a ton of infrastructure, it makes it into the home lab environment, right? So that's really where Meraki comes in. So Steve, I assume that you can see my screen right now. So my ask is just, if you see something that you'd like to point out, please do, but I'm going to go through a quick demo of this. So what you guys should be looking at right now is the topology that I have set up here in the home lab. So you'll notice I had mentioned that I have way too many access points. And I think in the first video, I mentioned it's because I don't want my wife to complain about dead spots. By the way, I told her that, and she had some choice words for me, so that's something completely different. But what I do have here is I have an MX64 with a security appliance. We'll talk about that. I've got two switches, an IDF switch and an Office switch, and then I actually have these MRs here, which I've got 4 of them that run throughout the house. And again, it's probably overkill. We'll talk about that. So let's go. And the other one that I want to point out is actually I have multiple networks that are represented here. So actually have my home here. We've got my wife's business. We've got a friend's network. And then we actually have our mobile device management software running as well, which I'm not going to spend any time speaking to that. Frankly, there are better videos that are out there than I could ever provide. So let's jump into the client side. Steve, I don't know about you, but this is where I like to begin anytime I'm managing a Meraki network. I like to see the traffic patterns, and I can change this between all clients or security clients, or in my case, I usually just look at it from access point because most of the devices here are connected by access point. But it gives me this really great view of top traffic that's seen, where people are connected into, and I can change each one of these names in the description so it's a logical name. Now, in my case, I don't have Active Directory. We've talked about that in previous videos. But if I had Active Directory, I could integrate that in here. And I'd imagine, Steve, you probably see that in most corporate networks. They do some Active Directory integration, don't they?
Absolutely, absolutely. Especially you're seeing a lot of radius with ICE today too. It's been it's been something that we used to encourage, but customers were late to adopt, and now everybody's doing that.
Yeah, that's a good point. Something that I'm not running in the lab, but certainly it was within the Cisco ecosystem is ICE does integrate with Meraki, so that's a great call out right there. So let's go through a couple of things. Let's talk about traffic analytics because I think this is pretty cool. You know, in most traditional networks, everything that I'm showing you would require the stand-up of a different server. There's different licenses that go with it, and all of this is just included as part of the Meraki subscription. So I can come through here and just see some basic data about my network very, very quickly. Notice there's a lot of secure web traffic that's going on, some UDP traffic. And of course, any of this that I don't know about or don't like, I can of course dig down deeper into it and get more granularity into it. So it's both traffic analytics, it's informational, but it also does have some security purposes. And as we get a little closer into the security side, you'll definitely see what I'm talking about there. I have kind of a story. It was a couple of years ago, actually. I was having tons of problems with Netflix, and it seemed like it was tied to my user ID in some way. So I was actually on the phone with the Netflix tech support. They do have tech support on the phone. Don't know if you knew that, Steve. But I finally asked him, I said, would you like me to do a packet capture? And the guy on the phone is like, oh, man, I've got to tell all the people around me. That's the first time someone's been able to do a packet capture for me. And I was like, yeah, let's do it. And really all I did is I clicked on packet capture here. Everything's going to run slow because I'm doing this on video, right? And I just simply told it which port it was connecting into, and I did packet capture for the guy. And he thought that was the coolest thing ever. So you can absolutely do packet captures from here. And keep in mind, this packet capture, it doesn't mean that you have to be local to that network. So I think a lot of the use cases we see are going to be companies that have remote networks. They can still do packet captures even if they're remotely connected to them. So we have map and floor plans. I'm not going to spend much time there. Obviously, so there's some general configuration. Let's get to the interesting stuff, though. So I'm going to transfer networks over to my wife's business because my firewall that I'm running here is just there for testing. But this is actually a firewall that is in use right this moment. So my wife has a very small medical practice, and so we run Meraki for her for security stack. So this is going to be just the summary dashboard here. I can actually configure these in an HA pair. I don't have it right now, but I have had it actually that way in the past. So we can do an HA pair, configure the warm spare, and put it in there. We can do all kinds of things with uplink, DHCP. I'm not going to spend time going through there. I really want to get over and talk about the firewall features. So the firewall features are very similar to some of the features that you guys saw in Firepower. So for instance, I wanted to block different DNS settings so that I could utilize Umbrella, and we spoke about that. What's really, really quite cool, though, about Meraki is they actually have integration into Umbrella natively. So I don't have that turned on the firewall right now, and the reason for that is because I actually have it turned on in the wireless, and I didn't see a need to do both. But I can still do geo-blocking. I can block applications. So in this case, I have peer-to-peer applications blocked from her network, and then I can put in all kinds of basic firewall rules. I also have the ability. Let's see, where did it go? Where did it go? I can block IP spoofing and trying to remember where my, here it is, threat protection, thank you. So threat protection, this is going to be the IPS functionality. So Steve, if I recall, Meraki was using Snort as their IPS before Cisco was even in the picture, is that correct?
That's correct, yeah, we were using the SourceFire Snort engine even prior to the acquisition. It was the best in breed at the time, and it still is today.
That's awesome. So right here we have the intrusion detection and prevention. So if you just want to put it in a monitor mode, you can do so. I'm a big believer, why monitor it when I can stop it? So I'm in prevention with a security rule set, okay? Also, we've had some videos of advanced malware protection, but really from the standpoint of being on an endpoint, I mentioned that it also plays on our network appliances. And right here, you'll notice that I've enabled that. So as files actually traverse that network ingress and egress point, we're actually doing some inspection there, which I think is very, very cool. You can have content filtering. Again, I think on the previous video I mentioned I don't do content filtering on firewalls because I typically do it with Umbrella. And so here's where you could continue to do that. You can go on and put in categories to block. You can select some predetermined categories. You can put in individual URLs. Whatever you'd like to do, you can put that in. And Steve, I am kind of curious though, are you seeing a lot of people still using content filtering on the MXs, or do you see them moving towards Umbrella, or is it kind of a split?
It's kind of a split. It's kind of a split. Obviously, we encourage the umbrella because it has a much greater rule set that you can customize, but it's kind of a split still.
Now, when we were jumping on before, one of the things that you and I had kind of a pre-call, we were talking about work at home. Obviously, that's something that a lot of people are very interested in now. You told me something interesting about using SSIDs to connect to VPN. So we're going to show, we can actually show that in the wireless for a second. But can you talk very quickly about the MXs and when paired with something like a Z series and being able to do auto VPN? Because I think that's very interesting.
Yeah, and we're seeing, you know, especially right now with so many teleworkers coming into their businesses, and they're not, some of them were prepared for it, some of them were not, but the auto VPN, it was an invention several years ago by Meraki. One of the coolest inventions I've seen. I have emails that go into great detail about how much more time these IT people have on their hands now that they don't have to spend all day setting up a VPN connection that used to take them half a day or a day per site, right? So the auto VPN, it does your negotiation for you for the VPN IPsec tunnel configuration. It sees the IP address on the head end, it sees the IP address on the spoke, and it'll automatically set up your VPN tunnel. One of the neat things about that, a couple of neat things about that, one is you don't have to sit there and figure out all the IP addresses before you stand up your tunnel. You just plug them in. Right. Meraki will figure out that this is the hub, this is the spoke, and set up your VPN connection. So if your IP address changes, your ISP service decides to change the IP address for whatever reason, the tunnel will just stand itself right back up without any involvement from you, which is awesome. The other great thing with that is if you want to take a device traveling with you, we have a lot of CEOs that take a little Z3 box or an MX68 CW box, travel, take it, hook it up in the hotel, it'll automatically stand up the tunnel for them, and they're off and running. They can just take that box and drive it around wherever they want to go.
So the big question is, does it work on David Geffen's yacht?
Actually, it will if there's a LTE or a satellite connection. Sure, absolutely.
There you go. I think that's the hot thing right now. Everyone's pissed at that guy. So the other one that I wanted to point out is, of course, right now, anything that zero touch is hot because IT teams aren't able to actually get in their labs, build up gear and ship it out. So one of the things that I love also about Meraki is the zero-touch deployment. So you guys will actually ship it out of your warehouses, provide all of the information needed to the IT team so that when that device actually reaches out to the Meraki cloud, it self-configures. You can actually configure the whole device as it's actually being shipped, and it pulls down that configuration when it lands. And that might actually be someone's home office with like a Z3. So I think that that's something that's huge right now. And as we record this video, Steve, I know that we're working on trying to get the lead time shortened on Z3. Last I've heard is we'd actually made some real big improvements on that. Is there anything you can speak to there?
Yeah, I mean, we went through a pretty significant supply of inventory due to the coronavirus demand for teleworker appliances. We were able to escalate production, and it looks like we're going to be able to get some in late April. It might even come in sooner than that, but yeah, kind of to be determined if we can get it sooner, but for sure late April.
That's great. No, that's great to hear. And I did hear that we prioritized some very large orders for some healthcare institutions to help with the coronavirus and its impact on the community. So I've jumped over into the switching side. And we're only going to spend just a few seconds on the switching because I just want to point out, I don't have big switches. I've got some 8-port switches. But in my lab environment, I have these 2 switches. What I love to do is be able to go to actually the switch ports, view all of my switch ports together, and make any sort of configuration changes just simply by clicking on the switch port and hitting edit. So if I want to do a mass configuration change across my whole stack of switch ports, regardless of if it's 1 switch, 2 switch, 10 switches, I can absolutely do that. You'll notice in a prior video when we were talking about StealthWatch Cloud, I mentioned that I have everything from my network actually being mirrored or port spanned over onto a port that then goes to a Raspberry Pi that generates the StealthWatch Cloud data. So you'll notice that's right here, right? So I've got all of these ports. They're actually mirrored to port number 8 as my mirror destination. So that's how I've generated that. And all the traffic has to run through here, through this switch, because this is the slave to that switch. So it's MDF IDF setup. Okay. And I think that's all I want to say right here. Is there anything you'd like to comment on the switches, Steve, before I move on? Because I think wireless is probably the place most people want to see.
Yeah, it's a good example of what we call virtual stacking, the ability to make mass changes across multiple switches, all from the GUI. And there's a bunch of stories regarding customers being able to optimize their staff as well, maybe going from 10 people managing their switch network down to maybe 5 because it's now so much easier and faster.
Well, and I know early on in the Meraki days, we talked about virtual stacking as a replacement for physical stacking, because at the time, Meraki didn't really have that in the portfolio. And I'm going way back. I'm probably going 5, 6, 7 years ago, right? But just for everyone that's out there, we do have physical stacking on those devices now as well. So you have options to do virtual stacking, physical stacking, you name it. The name of the game, though, is configurability and how easy it is to configure the devices across multiple locations. And I think that's one of the areas where Meraki's been incredibly strong, really across the whole enterprise gambit, but retail has been just a phenomenal place for you guys, right?
Absolutely. Yep. I think it's our number one, if not one, it's two, as far as our verticals go. Very high demand in retail. Just the distributed architecture of retail, it just screams Meraki, right? Because you can do so much remotely without having to have smart hands on site.
Indeed, and you'll see, we've seen some retail networks. I mean, it's thousands of devices, right? And just managing it all from one central dashboard. It's great. So right now I'm in the access point area. Now here, just right away, I can go in and tell if I've got any problems, okay? If I have any offline or any that are alerting, or my 4 that are online, you can imagine that as this scales up to hundreds or thousands of APs, just having that at the top would be pretty significant. I've got a connectivity graph right here, so I can tell if any connectivity problems have happened in the past. So this is a great glance at just a little bit of health status. You can customize each one of these, so I picked what kind of matters to me. The Meraki APs actually will do mesh. So if, for instance, I have a situation where maybe a cable goes out, it can actually still mesh as long as it's still powered. It can still mesh with the other neighbors and actually continue to provide support. So a little configuration there, but for the most part, that's automatic. So this is a view into the access points. One of the things that I love is Air Marshal. So Air Marshal is constantly looking around and trying to see if there's any sort of things that are malicious that are coming from the radio traffic. So for instance, I may have something like a rogue SSID or a spoof. In these cases, what it will do is it'll actually send a disconnect packet, intercept that, send a disconnect packet, and stop you from accessing. The way that I've definitely found that out is if you ever connect something to your network, like a Google Home, like the one that's behind me, and it gets disconnected from your network, and then what they start doing is then they start broadcasting their own SSID. So what it sees is it says, oh, wow, you were connected to my network and now you're broadcasting an SSID. This looks weird. It looks like you're trying to actually extend my network. We shouldn't let you do that, and it'll stop it. So anytime I configure any sort of IoT type devices from home, I usually turn this off because it has resulted in a few minutes of frustration for me when I've forgotten that I have this on. The other one that's fun to do is if you've got neighbors that are driving you crazy, you can put them in the ban list and disconnect them for a little while. Completely illegal what I just said, so don't do that. That's completely a joke. It is illegal. All right. Location heat map. This is another fun one. So this will display the location. So right here, you see it's a layout of my home. It'll actually display over time where it sees kind of the aggregation of the consolidation of users within the environment. I'll tell you it's not specific because, for instance, at 3:15 a.m., there's quite a few devices that are going to be sitting in my bedroom, which happens to be over here. So it's not exact, but this especially happens when you start looking at big corporations. You can start to look at traffic flow from there. We're going to skip through all of this, except I definitely want to hit 2, which are RF spectrum. Sometimes you'll see that you have slowdown in the network and you can't really figure out why. And my first thing is to jump into the IP network and try to figure out what's going on there. Occasionally, it's because you have channel overutilization. Someone next door to you, or you're backed up next to another company, and they switch channels, and suddenly your channels are saturated. This is a great place to go really quickly and just check to see what your channel saturation looks like. I also do have it turned on so that it will do auto channel negotiation. So it should avoid the problem that I just described, but it's nice if you can go through here and take a look and see what's going on. And then wireless health. Steve, is this a fairly new add-on? I seem like wireless health wasn't there a couple of years ago. Is it just something that I missed, or is it something that's
right.
new?
It's been within I think about the last year. launched. It was in beta for quite a while, and now it's in GA. I think the last 6-7 months it went GA.
Okay, great. Well, so I took a look at this before because the first thing I saw was, what the heck is going on? 71% are failed connections. And when I did some digging, let's see if I can find it, it's all coming from my Apple Watch. So it's the watch that's right here, and it's because I didn't enter the passcode right, so I've got to fix that. But that's why we're seeing a massive amount of failed connections. It's actually authentication failures. But again, if I didn't know that that was going on, coming here and seeing that there's one client device that makes up 76.9% of the failed connections, and it's an authentication as a stage, that saves me so much time being able to do that, because now I know that I need to go to that one device, or I can validate with a user that's calling into the help desk and say, hey, your Apple Watch really is having problems connecting.
Yeah, and that's a great proactive tool as well. I was just going to bring up, we did the Masters in Pebble Beach recently, and we found that there was about to be a major issue with authentication for guests. The reason we found that out was through wireless help. We had some clients trying to authenticate to the wireless network that had the same phone from last year. And last year, it actually had the same, I think, user authentication passcode or something along those lines. But they were able to fix that issue before any complaints ever came up. But they had, about 10,000 guests on the network at that point in time, and they were about to have a huge issue and fixed it before anybody even knew.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So what I jumped to while you were talking, Steve, was the firewall and traffic shaping. Now I can do this per SSID, and what I wanted to show everyone, obviously there's a ton of configuration to be done here, but the primary thing is just to link my previous video to this one. When I talked about that we could actually integrate Umbrella directly with Meraki, it's as simple as this. You notice that the policies I showed you just the other day actually exist right here. So I can apply policies from Umbrella and actually have Meraki enforce that the DNS goes to my Umbrella instance and goes through one of these policies based on the SSID. That's huge, and that can be done at the firewall or at the AP level. So absolutely massive. And then we were also talking about the ability to actually put in SSIDs, that the SSID actually VPNs back to like a corporate location. So you could have situations where work from home users, when they're just doing kind of their general personal business and watching of Netflix, they log into their own personal SSID. However, when they want to do VPN, they can just log into their SSID for their corporate, and they can traverse the network in an encrypted format that way.
That's been a big replacement solution too, Clayton, for the lack of the Z3 inventory right now. Mm-hmm. A good alternative is to just send out an access point to a teleworker's home, set it up to auto VPN, similar to how the MXs and Z3s work. Similar price point, same functionality. And the nice thing with that is, when the teleworker need subsides, you can probably repurpose that access point in a corporate facility somewhere, right? So it's not a lost expense.
Indeed. And we're kind of wrapping up here real quickly, but each one of the SSIDs you can configure individually. If someone has questions on that or wants a deeper dive, we can absolutely do that. Just post in the comments. I'll be happy to come on back and maybe do a deeper dive in some of these sections. Again, this is designed to be kind of a bigger view. What I wanted to point out, though, were firmware upgrades. So firmware upgrades on network devices can be painful. I think we can all just admit to that. When we talk about doing it in a Meraki network, it is the easiest thing that you can do across multiple locations. So in this case, let's just say I happen to be up to date on just about everything here, but let's say that I wanted to take my security appliance from the Arrowwood location. I hit schedule upgrades. I pick the upgrade that I want, or if I want to downgrade, by the way, which is sometimes difficult in some appliances to do downgrades, I can even do a downgrade here. I would select what I want. I would click next, and then I can either schedule it or I can have it happen immediately. And when I say immediately, it takes about 5 minutes to queue and to push out. I use this all the time. Steve, I would imagine the customers love that feature, and they also love, you can do auto upgrades as well during service windows, if I recall also. Is that true?
That's right. Yep. No more showing up to the office at 2 in the morning to do your firmware upgrade. There's zero touch, schedule them. And the cool thing is while it's downloading this new firmware, it stores the startup config in the old firmware as well. So if it doesn't take for some reason, the device will still continue to operate just using the original firmware version.
That's awesome. Well,
no more bricking devices.
Exactly. And by the way,
Yep.
for those that are watching this out there, if you want to tell your spouse you still need to go in or stay out until 2 o'clock to do firmware upgrades, Steve and I are not going to tell them you're welcome to stay out at the bars, that one time a quarter or so that you would normally do updates. We're not going to stop you from that. But I'll end on this, and I think it's fair to say there's a ton of reporting capability that comes out of Meraki. I really love it for that because especially as I'm managing a couple different locations with my wife's business. I mean, my wife's business runs completely online. It's a medical place, and so therefore all of her records are actually a software as a service. So it's very important that network stays up, even though it's a really small network. It's incredibly important to her, and I would imagine that expresses for all of us right now that are doing work from home. So, Steve, I'll let you have any final words. Anything else you'd like to say before we let you go?
No, impressive network. Thanks for taking the time. Thanks for having me as your first guest, I think, of the year. So glad to be here. Hope everybody out there watching, stay safe, keep your family safe, and let us know if there's anything at all that we can do for you.
Awesome. Steve, thank you so much for being on. And to all the viewers out there, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll catch you later. Have a great one. Bye.